We'd like to welcome everyone and let you know we're very excited to present to you today how to be successful in the regional flood planning process. My name is Rob Armstrong. I am the Water Resources Discipline Lead at Huitt-Zollars. I am joined here by my colleague Allison Wood, an associate at Huitt-Zollars, as well as Matt Highland, a strategic account manager for AppGeo, a geospatial data management and IT solutions firm. Most are probably already aware of the process, but we want to highlight the fact that with this flood planning process, the first deadlines are quickly approaching. Note that the existing conditions flood risk analysis is to be completed by the end of July, which is coming very quickly. The RFPGs are going to be moving at lightning speed, and we got to ask ourselves, where do we want to start to be best positioned to contributing to the regional and state flood plan and getting our projects funded? So what do we need to know as a contributor to the regional and state flood plan? We've broken this down into kind of three cycles. First, to talk about predicting, to understand our flood risk. The second discussion topic will be to propose projects and studies. How do we propose projects and studies? Of course, the guidelines also include strategic initiatives as well. We're going to focus today on projects and studies. Then finally, prioritize. How do you score well in this process? What data do you need to gather? How do you need to prepare it? Do you need to supplement what you already have? What projects or studies do you want to propose? How do you get the data that you need ready to submit? And what do you need to make sure your projects and studies are going to rank highly? Those are the types of things we want to talk about today, specifically from the perspective of a local jurisdiction in trying to supply data to the regional flood planning groups. So we're going to start with predict. How can we identify locations with flood risk? Well, there are several steps that you can start taking now to be prepared for your regional flood plan and providing data to your flood planning group with your best available local data. It all starts with the data. The Water Development Board is providing very specific requirements for data that must be collected and used in the flood risk planning process. They also have a specific format in which the data is to be submitted. And these documents are outlined in draft format at the time of the recording of this presentation. In addition to the data that the Water Development Board requires, you'll need a typical GIS layers from your local area, things like roadways, places, infrastructure, demographics, things like that you'll need to support your analysis conclusions. Submitted data also needs to be transformed to the Water Development Board specified schema and delivered in a GIS data set. You'll need to provide metadata, which is data about the data, such as when and how was it collected, what projection is it in, what resolution, spatial accuracy, things like that. And not just spreadsheets, but GIS data sets need to be presented. So what data do you already have that can help you tell your flood risk story within your community? You need to start with an objective assessment of how good your data is. What's different about what you have versus what's being required by the Water Development Board? And then how can you transform your data to meet the Water Development Board guidelines? And don't underestimate this task. Be prepared to repeat it multiple times for each of the projects within your city that you plan to submit for either a study or a project. So automating this process could save a lot of time and money down the road. I think, for example, the University Park has intersections susceptible to flooding, and this seems like a valuable flood-related information. But what Water Development Board prescribed features does that relate to? So those types of details and understanding what data you have and how to transmit that and the data is going to be accepted is going to be very important to get that correct and save time in doing that. You can also propose studies now that can translate to projects in the future in the next plan if you need more information. So we're going to be walking through several examples using the city of the University Park which we have shown here in the slide, and many others following. So what data is also provided by the Water Development Board? They've got their data hub, which most are probably aware of, as represented in the graphics at the top of this screen. A wealth of information there in that data hub. They've also got this floodplain quilt. Their guidance includes it's FEMA effective and preliminary data, base level engineering data, First American Flood Data Services, Fathom, Corps of Engineers, and other federal sources. So the idea is they're kind of weaving together all of this flood data so you can pick and choose the latest and greatest flood data for your area if you don't have any specific studies of your own. And it's important also to keep in mind it's going to be nice to use web services where you can live link the data so that you're not constantly copying data if you can, but constantly updating with what's the latest and greatest automatically. So we want to walk through 3 different scenarios that you might be in as a city or an entity participating in this flood plan. In this basin of University Park, shown in green here, we performed a flood analysis and prepared a master plan. So we have detailed recent hydrology and hydraulics modeling and results, and we have specific projects within that master plan where costs and benefits are associated with specific projects inside of that master plan. So we're all good with data there. It's just a matter of translating things and submitting it to the Water Development Board format. So you may have many projects like that as well, where you've got everything, you just got to get it in the right format. Next type of project you may have, what we're calling the silver level, data with gaps. So perhaps not super recent. As an example here, shown in purple, University Park subbasin, where maybe further study is still needed, but you've got an understanding of your flood risk, and maybe there's some other data you can pull in and fill in the gaps where you don't have data, and still develop what you need in order to propose a project within the regional flood plan. Then there may be some data, what we're calling the bronze level. Perhaps all you have is basic information about flood risk through the form of citizen complaints or road closures, things like that. But you don't really have an understanding of the risk, and you feel like you can't really propose a project, and you need additional study. So the proposed and prioritized sections of this presentation will discuss this condition further. So I'd like now to transition to Matt to talk about managing data that you'll need, and to propose, kind of walking through proposing a project.
All right. Thank you, Rob, and thank you all for listening. Collecting and organizing your flood-related data so that you can assess it, understand it, and share it can be a big task. Making that data available to the public and to stakeholders so that they can understand your data status will be a key aspect of the community outreach and engagement aspects of the flood planning process. If you haven't already done so, you may want to establish a data management and sharing platform that meets a few critical requirements. It needs to be easy to use and understand. It needs to facilitate feedback, and it needs to help you track and communicate your progress. You'll want to do this soon so you have a means of organizing and illustrating what you have and don't have. In addition to mapping, you may also want to include dashboards or charts that illustrate activity status. Your platform should be easy to set up and maintain, and it should allow you to import data or connect directly to web services. In this case, we've used AppGeo's MapGeo software as a service platform, which provides a Google-based map and Google Street View. We've imported data from the TWDB Data Hub, the City of University Park, and from Huitt-Zollars' recent project there. We've also made a web service connection to FEMA data. Regardless of the tool you use, you'll want to facilitate transparency and communication with the public, stakeholders, and your RFPG. So next, we'll talk a little bit about how you can move forward to proposing flood management evaluations and flood management projects. If you already have all the data you need to define projects, or if you already have projects defined, then double check to make sure you have all the data required by TWDB. Check the prioritization criteria to see if you can modify your projects to score higher. Allison will talk more about this in a moment. Then transform your data to the required format and submit it. Your RFPG technical consultant might perform this step for you, but if you make it easier for them, that is, if you provide your data early and already in the right format and leveraging your unique local knowledge, then the more likely it is that your needs will be represented in the first round of the regional and statewide plan. If you found significant gaps between the data you have and the data you need to quantify flood issues, then you can propose flood management evaluations. If you have sufficient data to define flood management projects, then by all means, go ahead and propose those, remembering to pay attention to the prioritization criteria. If you're missing most of the data that you need, you can use your data management platform to perform outreach, engage with the public and with stakeholders, collect their feedback, and begin to document your flood issues and data gaps. You can then use this qualitative information to propose your flood management evaluations. Again, you'll want to get started soon and keep in mind the prioritization criteria. Now, to wrap up this section, once you have a handle on what data you have and what data you need, you'll start working toward identifying studies and projects to help mitigate flood issues in your area. Regardless of your data status, community outreach and engagement are very important to the flood planning process. Making information available to all who want and need to know will encourage maximum participation, representation, and buy-in for your proposed studies and projects. Let them know what's going on and how this process will help them, and they will help you make progress. Your flood data management and sharing platform can facilitate all of these activities. And now, Allison will provide some insights on the prioritization criteria.
Thanks, Matt. So there are several criteria that must be met for incorporation into the flood plan, and then several ranking criteria that will be key to getting your study or your project prioritized for funding. So some of the key components are going to be asking whether or not you have H&H modeling, being able to quantify what the impacts will be, whether it's understanding your existing flooding for studies or what will be your reduced impacts if you are proposing an FMP. Also determining what your associated benefits and costs are. The Water Development Board is developing a user-friendly benefit cost ratio tool. So our focus here will be on gathering those parameters that are going to feed into your prioritization criteria, because this is what's going to determine your rank for when they gather the state flood plan and allocate funding. So starting with the FMEs, we're just going to focus on the FMEs and FMPs today. These evaluations or studies are going to be a screening level. And so they're not going to require that you have detailed H&H analysis, as your proposed study is going to be for that specifically. So even if you have limited data, though, you still have to show why your area is a priority for flood risk evaluation. So you may want to look at historical records as well as evaluating what's in that floodplain quilt provided by Water Development Board. You may also include areas that you want to turn into FMPs after you evaluate them in this first plan and propose a project in the next regional flood plan update. So what's required for an FME? You need to say whether or not it meets an emergency need. What are your alternative or other funding sources? Do you already have H&H models in development? And then that quantification part. Can you determine how many people and how many structures are within your impact area? How many road closures have there been as a result of flooding? Items like that. And so again, using our University Park data, this is basin B, to where we have not done a detailed study or master plan yet. So we start by defining our study area and then gathering and visualizing all of the available data we have. Again, we don't need to completely understand our flood risk here, just what is available to us to be able to analyze these parameters. And if you don't have a defined area like this, you can use the markup tools that Matt showed and that I'll show in just a minute to be able to come up with what you think your impact area is so that you can analyze these parameters. So once you've got that in your GIS platform, it's a matter of intersecting your area of interest with all of these different GIS layers to automate extraction of these different parameters and transform them to the prescribed schema provided by Water Development Board. I have in here also things like zoning and land cover turned on, where I can see if I think future conditions might exacerbate flooding issues and turn that project into an emergency need project. I pulled in here just a couple of the layers that are publicly available through the GIS Data Hub provided by Water Development Board. A couple of things I want to point out: low water crossings, high water marks. This helps me understand what my existing flood risk is, as well as critical infrastructure. Are there shelters or hospitals in the area? And then we've live linked to our FEMA flood data. So we've got the latest and greatest there. Some other components that aren't necessarily flood related, but are related to the prioritization are things like the social vulnerability index. So understanding persons below poverty or per capita income is actually going to play into your prioritization for grant funding. We've also brought in here all of our parcel data. So understanding the land value and again, the population data. All of these are going to play a large role when it comes to prioritization. Water Development Board is also in the process of developing a structure shape file that will aid in this analysis as well. So moving on to FMPs, these are your actual projects. One of the differences between the evaluations and the projects is in this quantitative benefit area. You not only have to show the number of structures in your area, but actually how many structures are you taking out of the 1% floodplain as a result of this project that you're proposing? How many miles of roadway are you taking out of that floodplain? What's your estimated reduction in annual damages? So this does require a certain level of H&H analysis. Another thing to consider is, are there multiple benefits to your project? Do you have a contribution to water supply, or maybe a benefit environmentally or with water quality? So I have this little video here to just show how many fields are required in the templates provided by TWDB for each of these projects that you're proposing. There are 75 fields with lots of different information, everything from the HUC that they're in, what's the project cost, the area, again, how many structures are you removing, how many low water crossings are there, as well as reasons for a recommendation of this project. So there's a lot of information required. So like we've stressed before, start now and gathering that data to set yourself up for success. As I mentioned, you'll have to look specifically at what you're removing from the floodplain as a result of your project. So this is our Basin A University Park. If you attended the session yesterday, you might recognize this underground detention, but on the left here, we have our existing flood results, and on the right, our proposed, showing what area we're taking out of the floodplain. And by intersecting those GIS layers, we can then quickly analyze how many structures are we taking out, what are our reduction in damages. If you don't have that detailed information, it may still be possible to propose an FMP. You can use a sort of markup tool to mark up what you think your impact area is. I have my proposed detention here, and then my estimated impact area based on the GIS layers that I do have. Once you overlay all of this information, you can determine, do I have enough to move forward with an FMP, or do I need to propose an FME to study the area first and come back next time with that FMP? Another benefit to this is if you're looking at this tool with all of your layers included, you can also pull in things like your social vulnerability index and other factors that may help you refine the area for your project, increase your benefit, and bump you up in the prioritization ranking. So there are 17 criteria that Water Development Board has come up with for ranking projects. Each of these 17 has a table like I've shown here with proposed scoring for each of those items, along with suggested approaches for determining those required parameters. They will be developing a final set of ranking criteria that's going to go through public review process. But what I would encourage you is to pick your top recommendations for studies and projects and focus on making sure you can maximize your score in each of these 17 criteria. So to just provide you from our perspective, what you should do to achieve priority points. Do you have historical records that you can bring in to help identify and quantify what your flood risk is right now? Can you leverage funding for your project? Are there alternative funding sources you can pursue? How can your project make a bigger impact? Can you maybe partner with a neighboring community to have impact in multiple watersheds or multiple communities? On the flip side of that, maybe you need to narrow your scope to areas that maybe have really high flood risk, or maybe focusing on low and medium income areas. Focusing really on areas that have priority needs will allow you to get those high priority points in the ranking. Can you add additional benefits like nature-based components, water supply, recreation that will again get you additional points? And then what potential obstacles in implementation or operation and maintenance can you mitigate now that will show that you've got a plan in place to where you won't have barriers to your project in the future? So just to wrap up, we covered predict, understanding what data you have, making sure you have a plan in place to be able to track and visualize that data. Gather the data now for the projects and studies that you want to propose so you can put yourself in a great position to work with your RFPG to get your project included in the regional and state flood plan. And then decide where do you need to focus your efforts so that you can have a greater benefit, increase your priority points, and make sure that your project gets funded. So I want to thank you for your time today, and we look forward to seeing each of the flood planning regions progress through their first flood plans. Thank you.